Hello, everybody. Happy Thursday. Welcome to another Healthy Chats with the Doc. Epigenetics is not going to be joining us today because Deb is at a meeting over in Arizona, actually. So we are going to fly solo on the Healthy Chats today, and we're going to be talking about blood sugar. So, sort of starting around October, right before Halloween until New Year's, I think all of us are getting a little more than our fair share of sugar in. We could probably all agree on that between Halloween candy and then Thanksgiving pies and Christmas cookies and everything else in between. And we did a chat a few weeks back, I think leading up to October, about just being mindful this time of year, because a lot of us can easily fall into the trap of, oh, well, it's the holidays, it's a Christmas cookie, my aunt made it, my grandmother made it, my friend brought them to me, like, it's okay, right? And the next thing you know, you're having cookie after cookie, day after day. And that's sort of how we lead into the holiday weight gain, right? So being really mindful of making decisions this time of year is going to be really important, not just because of the weight gain, but because sugar is actually an element that can be really harmful to us. And we get a lot more sugar in our diet in modern society than we have in any other time in human history. So we get, added sugar to processed packaged foods, to things that you wouldn't even think about. There's sugar in everything. And so it's really important to be aware and understand why this is important and how it affects you. So when we're looking at blood sugar, we're looking at what's called blood glucose. This is the test that we will do if you ever do like a finger stick test or you get a blood test with your doctor. It's blood glucose that we're looking at. Glucose is the measurement of how much sugar is in your bloodstream. And sugar is important. We need it because it's the primary fuel source that drives energy production, drives brain function. So we have to have sugar in the system, but it's that Goldilocks rule, like everything else in the body. You don't want it too high, you don't want it too low. Too low is when you're running into what we call hypoglycemia, so low blood sugar. And there's symptoms that can go along with that we'll talk about. Too high is where you're going to be having damage to the tissues, and you're maybe in that metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes syndrome, where we're having damage that's done. So we always want that happy Goldilocks rule where we would like to see blood sugar. Now, ideally, you want to always have blood sugar less than 125, even after meals. We do get spikes in blood sugar with certain things that we're eating, but in a perfect world, we don't really want to be spiking our sugar. We want to be keeping that blood sugar optimally under 125, even after a meal. At the most, with a sweet treat once in a while, up to 150, but under 125 is where you want to keep it maintained. And then the lower end, we're looking at about 70 or 80. So that's kind of the range that you want to be in if you're measuring your blood glucose. And this is going to change up and down throughout the day, depending on if you just woke up fasting or if you just had a meal and what type of meal you just had. Obviously, something that's higher in carbohydrates and or added sugars is going to cause more of that spike. So we want to be able to maintain that as much as possible. Again, the reasons is because if sugar's too high, it can damage your tissues. What happens when sugar gets too high is multiple things. One is sugar is sticky, right? I mean, you've spilled honey on the counter before, right? It's really sticky. So it's sticky in our blood, which means it's sticking to the blood vessels. This is called glycination. This is damaging to your cells, damaging to their blood vessels. And this can also have an effect on increasing risk of cardiovascular disease because of that damage. So we don't want the blood to be sticky, but the other thing that happens is when blood sugar is up, you're going to turn on more insulin. Insulin is the hormone that takes sugar out of the blood. So when it gets too high, we need insulin to bring it back down. So really important hormone. But if you need more and more insulin because you're eating more and more sugar and you're getting up above 125, 150, you need more insulin to bring it back down. Over time, the cells can start to become a little resistant to that insulin signaling. It's almost as if they're like, hey, stop bothering me. You bother me every day. I'm not listening to you anymore, right? They kind of get tired of it. They get desensitized to the insulin and become insulin resistant. And then the body has to put out even more insulin to say, hey, listen to me, you need to get this sugar out of the blood. So you may have increasing levels of insulin. And that's really the big problem too, is because high insulin turns on fat storing hormones. So this is part of why high blood sugar is a contributing factor to weight gain. And when people have difficulty losing weight, it's because that insulin hormone is causing problems. It's turning on the fat storing hormones. And so a lot of people struggling with weight loss actually have insulin resistance. And they may not know it because it's not a test that's commonly run, unfortunately, at your doctor's office, though it should be. So insulin is the one that creates a lot of these issues because of the signaling that it causes downstream. It also increases the aging process as well, too. Between the insulin hormone and the blood sugar getting sticky, we know that we can have increased signs of aging. So that can have an effect on our skin and our connective tissue and wear and tear on joints. So this we often see in the skin, the fine lines and wrinkles can get a little bit more prominent when our blood sugar is too high. We also see it affect things like acne as well too, and especially teenagers and even as adults, we can see that effect on the skin. So the high sugar and the high insulin both increase the aging process, as well as turning on those fat storing hormones. So and then on the other side of that spectrum, as I mentioned, you can have low blood sugar. And what can happen is if you're having high blood sugar, you can have crashes where you then come into low blood sugar. We don't want to be doing that either. We don't want to be up and down and up and down. We want to maintain that happy Goldilocks rule with some variation within there, but we don't want to be spiking and then dropping. So we can have drops in blood sugar because we have a spike and then we crash. Or maybe you just haven't eaten for an extended period of time, and maybe you're a little bit prone already to having slightly low blood sugar levels. So the low blood sugar people, that we see those Snickers commercials all the time with the hangry individuals needing a snack. Now, I wouldn't recommend a candy bar to be able to balance your blood sugar, because that has to do, that's going to just add more sugar to the system, right? There's a high amount of sugar in those things. So you want to, maybe eat something that's higher in protein and a complex carbohydrate instead. So the low blood sugar, like those commercials I was mentioning, hangry, maybe lightheaded, maybe dizzy, difficulty concentrating, fatigue, maybe even a little bit shaky as well too, are going to be the things that we're going to see if your blood sugar is too low. And that can happen again for those reasons that I mentioned. I see that we have a question about ways to improve insulin resistance, especially when one has genetic invariants that promote it. Excellent question. So there's two sides to that answer. One is that if we have genetic predisposition, we can manage it the exact same way as somebody who doesn't have the genetic predisposition. It just means with a genetic predisposition, you have to be a lot more diligent and a lot more on it than someone who maybe doesn't have that genetic predisposition. Managing insulin and lowering insulin and balancing blood sugar in general means that what you want to do is you want to focus on high protein. And that doesn't necessarily have to be animal protein, but you want to really focus on high protein, and you want to keep the carbohydrates low. And I don't mean like a low keto style diet. It's just you really want to be mindful of the carbohydrates that you're eating. So I always advise my patient, if you're going to eat a carbohydrate, make sure it's a complex carbohydrate. The reason complex carbohydrates are important is because they're complex, so they take longer to break down in the digestion, which means it takes longer for the sugar to be released into the bloodstream, versus something like a candy bar or sugar that is highly processed and refined is instantly going to be digested and turn straight to sugar in your bloodstream. So those simple carbohydrates, not hard to digest, go right to your blood and cause a spike. The complex carbohydrates take longer, so take longer to get to the blood sugar levels. So that's going to be things like sweet potatoes, beans, quinoa, your starchy vegetables. These are going to be good complex carbohydrates. Fruits that are going to be lower sugar fruits. So we're talking like apples and berries versus a banana or a pineapple or a mango. So you want to focus on lower glycemic fruits for your complex carbohydrates from a fruit form, and then those starchy vegetables. And then when you consume those carbohydrates, make sure your portions are appropriate. Like a portion size not a portion size, right? Especially over Thanksgiving, right? Those sweet potatoes, which often have added sugar, which they don't need, but we tend to, indulge maybe a little bit on the sweet potatoes. And so we want to be mindful of the portion size. And then I also recommend not eating what's called a naked carb. So naked carbs mean you're eating that sweet potato by itself versus pairing it with a fat and or protein. The reason that's important is because fats and proteins take a really long time to break down and digest. So if you have fat and protein in your system, when you introduce that carbohydrate, it's going to slow down the carbohydrates digestion even further, thus even further delaying the release of sugar into the bloodstream. So you're not getting a spike and you can stay under that 125. So the Mediterranean diet is a really great diet that's been well researched, that's easy to follow, and is highly recommended specifically for those genetic variances with risk to diabetes and blood sugar dysregulation. And the reason is, it's in addition to it being easy to follow, it's high in healthy fats, fruits and vegetables, and low in starches and carbohydrates. So that's a really good guideline to give you even more information on what foods that you can be eating that has been well researched. There's also some supplements, berberine, alpha lipoic acid, and chromium are good examples of nutrients that can also improve insulin sensitivity. So I hope that clarifies that question for you. Another really helpful tool that we've used a lot of people may have seen some Instagram ads or other TV ads about the continuous glucose monitor, or CGM. So these continuous glucose monitors, you'll see them, the people have the little stickers on the back of their arms there. There's a lot of companies out there that make them now. They aren't 100% accurate. There's going to be some variability, but they can show you patterns and trends, which can be very valuable information. There are some companies, they do have to be prescription. There are some companies out there where you can do like an online video chat and get one, but you can also ask your provider to get a prescription for one as well too. The sensor on the arm lasts about 2 weeks. And what's great is that you can see immediately how much a food is affecting you or not. So, maybe that acai bowl, which sounds like a great choice, actually turns out to be full of sugar because of the amount of fruit that's in there. And then you can have that immediate feedback to go, oh, wow, that spiked my blood sugar really high when I ate that. Maybe that's not the best choice. So it can be powerful information to see those trends over time of how you're reacting to certain foods, how quickly you're reacting to those foods, and then be able to fine tune some of your choices around that. So I love using the GCM. I think that that's a great option. We know that when your blood sugar is dysregulated, in addition to having these health effects, that it can really have an effect on your performance, your energy, your moods as well too. We need sugar for energy production, but again, too much damages the tissues and can cause wear and tear on joints when we're trying to perform, and from an athletic standpoint. It also can increase lack of focus and brain fog. So if you're, having to be highly productive, and again, you're getting these ups and down crashes if your blood sugar is not regulated. So eating high protein, managing your carbs, eating the appropriate carbs, and eating consistently throughout the day can be really good, helpful tools. The other thing that can help with insulin resistance and blood sugar management is regular exercise. So even if you aren't getting in, a big heavy workout, at least going for a walk once a day, especially after a meal, can really improve. So if you're really working on insulin resistance and you're prone to it, walking after a meal is a great way also to help improve that insulin resistance, because it's telling the body that we need to use that energy that it's now consumed and pull it into the cells. So that can help retrain the system as well too. I could go on and on, you guys, about blood sugar. There's so much more to know. It also stresses your adrenals. If the blood sugar is too high or too low, that is a stress on the body, which can add to your total stress load and your adrenal function. There's a huge connection with insulin dysregulation and PCOS, and that contributes to some of the cystic development and acne development. I feel like we could do a whole talk on PCOS, so I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole on that. But the point is that there is so many implications with blood sugar and our health. I hit kind of the big highlights here today, so I hope that was helpful and informative to you, and gave some recommendations on how you can help you manage them. So I encourage everybody just to be really mindful over the holidays. be aware of the choices that you're making when you're making those choices, making sure that you maybe are adding some of those supplements that I recommend. You can always check with your provider, meet with a functional medicine provider to look at what your insulin levels actually are as well too. Normal ranges are between like 2 and 25, which is a huge range, but most individuals in the functional world say that that should be between 2 and 4. Which is a much lower, more narrow range. And we find that most people are hovering in the 10s to 15s, which means that we're going in the wrong direction. So you may want to check with a functional medicine provider to have that looked at, get the GCM glucose monitor to kind of see where you stand and how you are responding to your foods and where you can make some changes. So I hope that that was helpful. Again, there's so much more we could talk about with blood sugar. It really is an important element to understand because of all the health implications and effects that it has on our well-being in all areas. So I hope you all are doing well. If you have any questions about the talk today, don't hesitate to post in the comments below. Anything you guys want to hear about in the future, don't hesitate to insert those in addition. I hope you guys all have a great week, and we will see you next week for another healthy